When I was just a youngin' of 10 years old, my family and I spent most of my youth up at a cabin in Maine. Here is an actual picture of our beach. Now, for those who have followed my gay erotic sports novel, Northridge High Football Camp, the boys camp on an island that the guys swim out to for a camping excursion. Well, that boys' camp was real and was located just behind the sailboat on the right. 3/4 of the land that you can see is this large island. Our cabin was on the mainland in a town called Shapley, and every summer my father would purchase a few truckloads of sand that would be brought in and spread out across our beach. Next to our beach, though, was a smaller one with only the natural sand that remains after the erosion that happened during the winter. Because our beach was so much sandier, we never minded that our neighbors to the left would sometimes lay their lounge chairs partly on our sand. Their son, who we had watched grow up, was now 20 years old, and he spent that summer laying on the beach by the water, getting a tan. His name was Bruce, and I shall never forget him. In previous years, Bruce was very friendly with my family. He always went out of his way to greet us as he saw us arriving at the cabin for the summer. My parents liked him. I was always talking about when I saw him, how he would lie out in the sun for hours, how cool he seemed. My mother was always the one who had to listen to my constant praise of Bruce. At that point, I wasn't hanging out with him. I was watching him. I found it much more interesting to observe him without him knowing that I was watching. And so I watched him. I watched him a lot. Previous years, I only saw him for brief weekends, but now that he had just finished his second year of college, he decided to lounge around for the whole summer. Within a few days that particular summer, I had started talking more freely with Bruce. He didn't make me feel like I was just some bothersome little kid. Bruce spoke to me almost like I was his age. Bruce would start talking to me from the short distance between our two beaches, but within a few minutes, I was over with him, many times sitting right on his chair as he entertained me with stories of his friends and their awesome surfing trips. And so began a couple of weeks where we spent quite a bit of time together. I would see Bruce bring out his lounge chair and set it up on the beach, and I would always try to find some excuse of why I needed to go down to the water, and oh, surprise, I ran into Bruce, and so we would start talking. After a while, I didn't see Bruce as often as I wanted. He was doing some other things that summer, and one of them was to build a small house-like shack where he could have some privacy. I'd watch him and his father working on it, Bruce's muscles straining as they lifted the heavy beams into place. He was a construction god, a blond, shaggy-haired surfer construction god. And so I started watching him, not just on the beach, not just doing construction with his dad, but I started getting to know his morning schedule. He would go out for an early run through the woods near the lake. He would do some calisthenics in the woods, like push-ups, and then he would sit and think. He would sit every morning and just let his mind focus and relax. I assumed it was some kind of surfer's mindset. And in between, we still got some beach time together, although I was inching closer to him as we would sit and talk. Sometimes I'd see Bruce sitting out on the end of his family's dock at night, drinking beer, and puffing on what I thought at the time was a cigarette. But it didn't smell at all like my mother's cigarettes. It was a sweeter smell. He sat with a lantern by his feet, illuminating him. It was when he was sitting out there at night that I first noticed he wore some anklets on one of his legs. They were made of colorful beads. I decided then that I was going to make one and give it to him as a present. And as summer went along, Bruce made good use of his little bachelor pad. It was really just one big room that was a bedroom and a living room. There was also a small bathroom and a small kitchen area. He would leave the door to his shack open in the morning, and I made many excuses to pass by the door as I walked. I would often see him in the kitchen area cooking up his breakfast on a small stove that they had put in. I often saw him just in his underwear as he cooked. Although his bathroom had a toilet, the shower was an outside one, hooked up to the side of his bathroom. So in the morning he could use the toilet and then walk right out into the shower stall that had been built. One night while I was walking my dog, suddenly Bruce's door to his shack opened and he stood there grinning. Suddenly he lifted his foot up and propped it up against the door frame. He smiled and pointed to his ankle. He was wearing the anklet that I had made for him. That was when I decided that I wanted to see him living his life, seeing things he did in private. Now, I knew it was wrong, and that was the reason that I had to sneak out of bed and head off into the darkness of the night. His shack was located right at the end of our driveway. I could see the lights on at night from our kitchen window. I started lurking in the darkness, just out of the light that emanated from the shack's interior. Bruce had no air conditioning or much of a fan to handle the summer heat, so he was often just wearing his underwear, and periodically he would stand in the open door to catch a breeze. I could easily hide in the partial darkness, waiting for him to come to the front door. I was almost never disappointed. One night, it was a bright full moon. Everything was illuminated. I decided this night to take it a step further. Staying in the darkness, I crawled along the side of the building until I came to the window. Bruce had turned the lights off. I lifted myself up just enough to peer into the window. I could see him lying on his bed, drifting off to sleep. I watched him for almost half an hour before I realized I needed to get back in my own bed so I wouldn't get caught. I watched his life more in the final weeks of that summer. I just watched him do normal things in his shack. And pervy little me was getting quite the view. So a few nights before we were to head back home, I followed Bruce one night along the lakeshore to a place where I didn't often go. He seemed a little down, and once he got to a certain spot, he sat there and he smoked some weed and he drank a beer and just was lost in his thoughts. Then he walked into the water, and before they got wet, he removed his underwear, tossing it on the beach. Although it was a night with a bright moon, I couldn't really see anything from the bushes that I hid in. Although at my age, seeing a guy naked wasn't a goal of mine. I did not yet know about sex, and all I knew was that I was drawn to Bruce for some reason, and I really liked how he treated me. I realized that I had begun to think of him as an older brother and I as his smaller kid brother who wanted to be like him. And then the fateful day arrived when my family packed up the car to head back down to Massachusetts. We were up early and I was a bit depressed. I knew it was too early for Bruce to be up because he was such a night owl. But to my surprise, Bruce was up and he told me to come to his shack because he had a gift for me. He gave me a Maine Black Bears baseball cap. I shook his hand goodbye, and he opened his arms wide. I hugged him goodbye, and I thanked him for such a great summer. And although my family had that cabin for a couple of more years, I never saw Bruce again. He had graduated college and was off somewhere living his blonde, shaggy-haired surfer life.